And that's exactly what my parents encountered whenever they called the brig in Okinawa. That's exactly what my Tokyo mom had encountered whenever they called the brig to Okinawa, the brig in Okinawa. Stonewalling. I don't know. I can't give you a straight answer because everybody understands the political implications of why I'm there, what I'm doing, but nobody wants to answer for it. Nobody wants to take responsibility for it. They just want to pawn it off to the next person to take care of. I came to America in handcuffs. So I was in custody and detainment in Iwakuni. They had arrested me in the MAG 12 upstairs. They had arrested me in the MAG 12 second floor of the conference room, commanding officer's conference room. They had arrested me there, put me in the cop car, taken me to the PMO station on Iwakuni, but they never put me in the brig in Iwakuni. And I want to talk about this because they could have. They absolutely could have. They're trying to tell me, oh, we don't have the female capabilities to keep you in the brig here, in Iwakuni. But if I had been put in the brig in Iwakuni, I would have only been there for 3 days, maybe 10 days, right? The reviewing officer would have come in, he would have looked at the case and been like, you're on this base, all your witnesses are here. Highly unlikely I would have been past 10 days in the Iwakuni brig. You put Marines on extra duty all the time, right? The commanding officers in Iwakuni who wanted to get rid of me, they would have gotten their pound of flesh with 3 to 10 days of Lance Corporal Arnett being in the brig. But they weren't satisfied with that, and they knew that, a release was highly probable. So instead they flew me that night on January 23rd from the Iwakuni police, station there on base, right? This is all military custody and everything. They flew me from detainment, questioning, arrest and everything from Iwakuni to the Okinawa brig, which obviously has more facilities, more capabilities, whatever, right? Whatever they want to say. But I have high suspicions, and I talked about this on my most recent interview with LifeSite Catholic News, that the commanding officer of the Marine Air Group 12, who has overseen all of this, has been working in unison with all the other commanding officers on base to put me in prison. He flew me from Iwakuni to Okinawa so that I wouldn't have access to the ultimate thing that propelled personal life and my Catholic faith life of the Eucharist. Because they only had one priest on the whole island of Okinawa. Daily Mass, that's not going to happen. Had I been in Iwakuni, well, the chapel in Iwakuni and the police station and the brig in Iwakuni are right next to each other. So would have been able to have daily Mass, would have been able to exercise my First Amendment right. Priest would have more than likely, been glad to bring daily Mass or daily Eucharist over to the brig for a few days, right? But they could not settle for just that pound of flesh. Instead, they had to have me in pretrial confinement for 113 days. Yeah, they had everything, and I have the FOIA requests. They had everything planned. It wasn't the lieutenant colonel of PMO. He came in and he's like, oh, we're seeing where we can get you. We're seeing where we can put you. We'll keep you updated. I have these FOIA requests that exhibit, literally, they had this PMO apprehension waiting for the weekend. They knew exactly where I was going. They had everything lined up. They were ready to put me on that plane to get me to Okinawa. They were ready. And they want to play the whole, we're going to try to accommodate you as best as possible. After that, I was flown stateside in military police custody. Like, these guys literally came from the Washington, D.C., whatever, East Coast absentee collection center area of the Marine Corps to come get me from Japan and bring me stateside. I came to America in handcuffs. Welcome home, Marine. So, to the best of my knowledge, my Tokyo mom, who Terminal Chiwo and Danny had been in contact with to kind of keep track of my welfare, or at least some kind of status, proof of life. Neither her nor my biological parents were informed of my move. I had to kind of guesstimate that I'm going to be moved and send Terminal Chiwo an SOS letter, basically. Like, if you don't hear from me in X number of days, put it out. I've probably been transferred. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know if I have promise of safe passage, but here's what I can update you with. Also, I just kind of a brief but important thing. On Monday, April 17th, I think, right? On the Monday of that week before I was transferred, I was supposed to argue my motion for pretrial confinement release. I was going to argue in front of the judge as my own legal representation, because I was pro se at the time, why I should compel the court, the judge, to release me from pretrial confinement. I was denied that opportunity, even though I believe that motion, that 39 alpha session, had been docketed. That was a docketed date to have me in the courtroom to argue that. And I was not brought from the brig to the courtroom in Okinawa. Instead, I just sat there all Monday, not being allowed to argue that motion. Now, the previous Friday, the prosecution had a, what's it called? I can't remember it off the top of my head, but they had a meeting with the judge that excludes the defense. Well, of course, I wasn't allowed in there because I'm the defense. They're not going to have the accused, who's acting as the defense, be present at a meeting like that. I mean, I have suspicions as to what was shared, as to what happened, but I had a docketed date to be released from pretrial confinement, and it didn't happen. And instead, I was flown stateside to sit in the brig for another month in San Diego. So whenever you get your court-martial charges, the charge sheet, right, there's this little place that the commanding general designates the site of trial to be at. Now, the commanding general had designated the site of trial to be Camp Pendleton, California. How does that make sense? Having a Marine who's in Iwakuni, all the witnesses are located in Iwakuni, mainland Japan. How does that make sense to have the court-martial in Camp Pendleton, California? It doesn't. They were abusing the system. They were abusing the brig system. They were abusing the court-martial system to put me in handcuffs and forcibly fly me stateside to depose of me from Iwakuni, because they couldn't stand seeing me. They couldn't stand me challenging their leadership. They couldn't stand a single thing about me, which, by the way, per the law that I was working with, it's completely illegal to put a Marine in the brig just because you don't like them, just because they're an irritant. An irritant? Really? You see me everywhere. You see me volunteering. You see me, community service. You see me at church. Ooh, I bet that rubs some of them the wrong way. That's completely illegal to put someone you don't like in prison. I mean, it was boring. I said it on LifeSite. I said it on all the other interviews I've done. It was boring, and it was cruel and unusual punishment due to the virtue of I was always on the move. I was always doing stuff. I was always active in the community. I was active, even trying to be as active as I could at the squadrons that I was kind of like swept under the rug to. Just trying to be as active and upbeat and helpful as I could. Right? Even if I didn't have access to the system in the later months there, I was still trying to help where I could. I was still seeking out people to help. That was kind of stripped away whenever I got TAD orders, which moves you from one squadron to another temporarily, from the 152 squadron to the logistics squadron. I was just shredding papers there. Yeah, that's when my work permissions were revoked for the second time. I was still helping out with DTS where I could, helping people get their money and everything. I didn't relent or let up on that. I stayed very hungry and excited to do my job. where I could. But yeah, my leadership capacities, I would say, were intentionally diminished. And then especially whenever I went from the logistics squadron back to 152, just to be taken into the Marine Air Group Squadron under the top commander there, who was hell-bent on putting me in prison. Well, I knew it was over. I knew that he had me exactly where he wanted me, and he was going to give me all these arbitrary orders that had nothing to do with my extension that I had just signed for a year with 152. And I know here a lot of the naysayers are going to be like, oh, well, the Marine Corps puts you where you need to be. Oh yeah, absolutely it does. And in 2020, whenever I got moved from one squadron to another squadron on a PCA order, which is like a permanent change of assignment, I was like, okay, bet, cool, new opportunity. But given the political circumstances of what surrounded this move, and given the attitudes and the sentiments that had been expressed to me, through snide remarks, through taunting, through public humiliation, right? I knew exactly where this squadron move was going. This commander was going to put me in jail. So, right, again, to all the naysayers who want to be like, oh, the Marine Corps is going to do X, Y, Z. Unfortunately, it still will do that, even if it's for very sinister intentions. And I had appealed. Keep in mind, I had appealed to my leadership, to men in positions of leadership. I just kind of want to distinguish between that. These men in positions of leadership, I appealed to them. I'm like, look, I'm going to be arrested. I'm not going to be able to execute my job. I'm going to be stifled. This is what's coming. And no one adequately responded to any of my pleas or my request masks or anything. I even requested to be moved to a completely different duty station. A completely different duty station overseas, because I appealed to my monitor. I'm like, there is a move that is coming that is not going to allow me to flourish in my capabilities as a Marine, as a leader, as a defense travel system agent. Basically, what the monitor said was, yeah, I know. You have these orders coming to you that are going to be cut soon. Good luck. So they were all in on it. I think we all know this by now. That's not news. That's not revelation. I'm just basically explaining it, how it all unfolded. That not a single leader that I appealed to helped in any capacity. Absolutely nobody. As soon as I was in the brig in Okinawa, and I'm just going to explain some stuff. Some of these things, the correction people, the brig people, the Marine Corps will be like, oh, that's standard policy, right? I get it. But whenever you subject a Marine to your standard policy for no reason, it's obviously retaliation. It's obviously retaliation. So instead of being checked up on by the Marine Air Group 12 in Iwakuni, right, because I was still under their command, I was just in the brig, they had pawned off that responsibility to the commands in Okinawa, who know nothing about me except through third-party sources. Oh, she's that troublesome Marine, tread carefully around her. So it was all stonewalling. It was just all formalities. It was just like, we're doing this because we have to. We don't really care. And the Marine Corps will try to be like, oh, we delegated it, right? That's what you're supposed to do. Whenever you have another Marine at another location, you delegate it. This is a situation of pawning off. Nobody wants to touch that Marine who brings up very intricate and detailed questions about the legality, the safety, and effectiveness of a certain injection, right? Nobody wants to touch that with a 10-foot pole. So I see it as pawning off, even though, on the black and white paper and the formalities that the Marine Corps can say, oh, we delegated it. We did the right thing. We still took care of her. And they didn't. No. Nothing was properly taken care of, because if it was taken care of, I would still be at my job. And we would have leaders just doing complete 180s on the things that they know was unlawful and wrong, but they had to preserve their career. They had to do XYZ. They had to keep their buddies' hands clean. So my release from incarceration came at a very, very interesting time. And I have to muse on this because it's just so heinous that they kept me in jail for so long just to release me the day before I argue my own motion again for release from pretrial confinement. I had written it all myself, acting as my own lawyer, and I actually had 2 motions that I wanted to argue that I was ready to argue. Release from pretrial confinement and objection to situs, which would move the court to have the trial be in Iwakuni, where all of the witnesses were located, where it would make logistical sense to have the court-martial. It happened last year, right? For my first round of court-martial, right? I was released on May 15th, on a Sunday, I believe, at like 9 p.m. at night. And that literal next Monday morning, I was docketed to argue my release from pretrial confinement. Now, I think I don't have to explain it, but I just want to explain the humor, the irony of it, if you will. The prosecution doesn't want to lose a motion to a lance corporal, especially for release from pretrial confinement. How embarrassing would that be? Oh no, Lance Corporal stood up for herself. We can't have that happen. I'm also fairly aware of some generous people who had been calling on my behalf for release, which was very gracious and kind, so that doesn't go unnoticed. But just the coincidence of everything happening all at once, I was ready to argue these motions, and I was stripped of that opportunity to do so, because that sets a precedence. You have a lance corporal argue her release from pretrial confinement without a lawyer, and she gets released. Can't have that. And also, I was going to move the court to have my court-martial in Iwakuni, because that's what makes the most logistical sense. Pardon me if I'm getting off on a tangent, but this plays directly into the whole court-martial being dropped once I get to California, right? So fast forward a few weeks later, on June 5th, the court-martial charges are pulled. No more court-martial. Well, guess what motion I was docketed to argue on June 5th? Objection to situs. Let's have the trial in Iwakuni. No, that was taken from under me too. Very, in my opinion, right, very well written motion that made a lot of compelling arguments to have the trial there. No, we can't have that either. So just I hope the audience sees the irony of these things, the coinciding timelines of everything. So on May 15th, I basically just had the prison uniform on my back with some papers, and they're like, all right, you have a barracks to go to. You have no liberty restrictions. And, just show up at X, Y, and Z places at this time, this time, this time. Okay, cool. Right? Show up. No big deal. I think a lot of the command in San Diego was just kind of floored with how chill I was, because I wasn't there to make a scene or do anything crazy. I was just like, look, I'm here at the place you need me to be, the time you want me to be. I just want to get through this court-martial and just get on with my career. And you had this sergeant major, this gunnery sergeant, and this CO being like, yeah, we're advocating for you. We're trying to do the right thing. Giving me all these formalities, all of this sweet nothings that I'm not even one ear and out the other. I just can't express, like, I don't think you can encapsulate it in recreating it through a interview or video. You have to be a Marine. You have to be a junior Marine, looking at that sergeant major in the eyes, asking him for help, and getting nowhere. It's truly a one-off experience, and it's some of the most disheartening things you'll ever experience, ever, in the military, in life, ever. You have these people who are appointed over you to be leaders, and they don't do their leadership thing. Here I am, wanting to, be a drill instructor, salvage my career, willingly going through 2 court-martials and prison time to salvage my career. And they're like, yeah, you're a trouble child. We don't need you. Cool. That's why I went through it. I wanted to salvage my career because I saw that the only way to play unconventional legal warfare with the DOD was to play unconventional legal warfare back. So, you get these charges, you wait it out through court-martial, and because of the precedent that the first court-martial set, a Lance Corporal stood up for herself. Well, now we're gonna get her on the back end with all these petty charges and just get her out. I looked everyone in the eyes who tried to give me all these paperwork, and I'm like, this is unlawful. You can do the right thing and advocate for me in the proper ways, not just, formalities coming out of your mouth. You don't have to give me these papers. I've spelled out for you that this is all entirely contingent on the COVID vaccine. And you know it. You can see it. From the commanding general stationed out in Okinawa. So I was stateside because that's where they can legally justify just kicking you out on the streets, which is what they did. That's where they can justify it. They can't do that in Japan with SOFA status agreements. So, coming from the 1st Marine Air Wing leadership, was effectively ordering me to be administratively separated in California without any due process. All my stuff's in Japan. Literally, all my stuff is in Japan. There was one large organization that stepped onto the scene, and all that transpired was a very large difference of opinion as to how to litigate my trial. I was largely displeased with the vindictive and cutthroat approach they took to my case, because I did not have that. My end goal was not to, go after anybody's job. My end goal was not to get out with an honorable after my 2nd court-martial. It was to just get through the court-martial, hopefully with an acquittal or a withdrawal, and just continue on in my career. There was large disagreements over that. And I had to part ways with the way that I was handled and the stipulations that came along with it. I do need to note, however, that obviously organizations see the injustice that is being done, and that's absolutely excellent, stellar quality, that someone, not knowing who I was or who I am, much about me, saw an injustice and moved towards it. What happened after that happened. But thank you for seeing the injustice, and that does not go unnoticed. So right now, I have my own Give, Send, Go, and whenever I had talked with LifeSite, they wanted to create their own Life Funder account for me as well. So those are my 2 fundraisers that I have right now. While I was in jail, I became privy to General Flynn putting out your interview from January, which I was very grateful for. People like Ivan Rakelin, Tori Says, Terminal Chiwo, Danny, all of the people that I interviewed with in 2022, Tim Brown, Sons of Liberty, other people that reached out to my mother while I was in jail, Colonel Brandy King, and other wonderful leaders. Stuart Scheller, whenever he spoke out in 2021, that empowered me to speak out. It was like, wow, someone with brass on their collar, calling for accountability and justice, and calling for leadership. That was a little bit prior to my incarceration, but nonetheless, it was still in the sphere of 2021, when the mandate kicked off, and I understand he was speaking out about something quite different, but just seeing people demanding leadership, asking where is the leadership? Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long, who was very vocal about her medical investigations, Lieutenant Mark Bashaw. That's who I can think of the top of my head. If I come up with anyone else, I would absolutely say their name.